What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be diving into my post-combine top 10 running back rankings, splitting all these rookie running backs into different tiers. If you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe. If you have any comments, think I should be higher, lower, let me hear it down below. But let's just dive right into the rankings here. And my number one running back, this is no surprise, he is my only tier 1 running back. It is Ashton Jeanty. At this point, I would be pretty shocked if another running back or even someone at another position, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, kind of overtook him as the 101 of this class. I've seen some talk, some people, now kind of taking Hampton. There have been some reports that some NFL teams reportedly have Hampton ahead of Ashton Jeanty. I'm just not really buying that. I don't really see the argument. Genty's just my clear-cut running back one. He's extremely well-rounded, great after contact, forces missed tackles at a high rate. Even though he didn't have great receiving production this past year, in 2023, he caught 44 passes for 578 yards with over a 3 yards per route run. So he's my clear top dog. I fully expect him to be the first running back off the board, and he is my guy here in tier 1. Now moving into tier 2, I have TreVeyon Henderson as my RB2. He is kind of smaller than some of these other top backs, guys I have in my top 2 tiers. 5'10", 202, certainly, playable. It's not a massive concern, but he doesn't really have that frame where you're like, all right, he's going to go out, be like a 75+% opportunity share guy. I just think he has a skill set that translates really, really well to fantasy production. He is a great pass catcher, a solid pass blocker, so he can be in there on the third downs. Put together pretty strong athletic testing, had a 9.45 RAS score. He has a ton of big play upside in 2024. 54% of his runs were on 15+ yard plays, so he's ripping off those big plays at a pretty high rate. And you just don't need that type of workhorse role at running back when you have the skill set that Henderson does. You think about like your Jahmyr Gibbs, your Devon Achans. If you're involved as a pass catcher and you're able to produce there, and then you also have the ability to rip off those big plays, still be, productive, explosive on the ground, you can still be like mid to high end fantasy RB1s. And I think that's certainly in the range of outcomes here for Henderson. He is getting some potential round 1 hype. Prior to the combine, it was like, all right, Genty's going round 1, and then maybe it's like Henderson or Hampton are kind of squeezing into the first round. At this point, I'd say Hampton's probably the favorite to go ahead of Henderson, but I also wouldn't be shocked if, both of them ended up sliding into the first round. And then also in tier 2, the guy I just mentioned, Amarion Hampton, he is going to be my running back 3. I think his draft stock is certainly on the rise at this point. He went in, absolutely dominated the combine. He's a huge dude, 5'11", 221 for the running back position. Ran a 4.46, which at that size is very impressive. He jumped well, put together a 9.93 RAS score. He obviously has the workhorse size, and I think he also has that workhorse skill set. He's physical, great with contact. He's a solid pass catcher, not, doing anything crazy, doesn't have a super advanced route tree, but good hands, can certainly fill that third down role, especially because he is a really good pass blocker. Like I said, Hampton is kind of gaining some of that more like locked in round 1 traction at this point. And if he ends up going like round 1 to, I don't know, a spot like the Chargers, which would obviously be just like an amazing landing spot, and then Henderson's going like sometime early round 2, even though I personally prefer Henderson the player, like that difference in draft capital would move Hampton up for me. So they're in the same tier. I could see Hampton jumping Henderson at some point, but as of right now, when I think both guys have shots to go in round 1, I'm willing to just keep them 2-3. And then to close out tier 2, I have Quinshon Judkins, and I think I was too low on him in the video I did earlier on in the week with like my round 1 rankings. I believe I had Henderson as my number 2 overall player, Hampton at number 4, and then Judkins might have been like number 10, number 11. Looking back on it, I don't think the gap should have been that large between those 3 running backs. Now, personally, I prefer Henderson and Hampton as players, but when I'm looking at how Quinshon Judkins went in, dominated the combine, seems like the NFL is still very high on him and kind of could view him in that same grouping. He's going to get the draft capital, and so eventually, I'm going to bump him up into a pretty similar range. So I did throw him into this tier 2, came to the combine 5'11", 221, ran a 4.48 40, jumped well, a 9.88 RAS score. He's a physical runner, obviously has that workhorse size, good in short yardage situations, certainly capable of catching passes. I don't think he has the same big play upside as the running backs ahead of him. even though he is pretty physical, statistically, he hasn't dealt super well with contact, which is kind of why I prefer some of these other guys over him. But I think the draft capital is going to be there. And if it is, I'm going to adjust, and he's going to be paired with these guys anyway. Now, tier 3, I have a one-man tier, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here with Caleb Johnson, because we had a lot of running backs at the combine that really helped themselves out, put together great times, had great testing. Caleb Johnson didn't bomb it by any means, but he was really one of the only guys that didn't give himself a big boost. He ran a 4.57 40, which the time, by itself is not a great time, but the dude's 6'1", 224. That's certainly not a terrible time by any means. I do think, though, it locks out really any chance he had of going round 1. You could have seen a case that a team's really high on him. He goes at the end of the first round. I still think he's going to be going day 2, but that round 1 capital seems, completely done at this point, where the top 4 running backs, I think, all have a case, to go in that round 1 area. The other thing that kind of limits him for me is just the limited receiving usage in college. So, not an elite athlete. I like the receiving upside of, the 4 guys going ahead of him here. Still think he's interesting. Could go round 2, round 3, but he's kind of in this middle tier between those studs and then the guys I'm going to be getting into here. So my running back 6 is going to be Cam Scatabo. This dude's just an absolute dog. 5'9", 219. Didn't run at the combine, but had the second highest vertical jump and then a fine broad jump. He definitely had athleticism concerns kind of, heading into this draft process. So I'd still like to see him run. I'm certainly not expecting some sort of amazing time, but it's good that he at least showcased the athleticism in the, jumping portions. He's a pretty unique player because he possesses a lot of traits of an early down guy. He's a super powerful runner, has good contact balance, good in short yardage situations, can definitely be your goal line back. But then he also is a great pass catcher, and he just doesn't really have the typical skill set or build that you would see out of a third down back in terms of someone who's going to be really productive through the air. In 2024, he caught 44 passes for 543 yards, only has a 4% drop rate, so definitely has very secure hands. And so you look at the skill set, and it's he could fill into a few different areas, and he has the workhorse size. It would not be shocking to see him kind of slot in to a third down role or a 3-down role. And obviously landing spot would be big here. You want him to go to just a wide open running back room. If he's going to a team that has an established third down guy or an established early down guy, then obviously that's probably going to limit his upside. But I think with a fun landing spot, he could be very, very interesting for fantasy. And then also in tier 4, I have DJ Giddens. I think he was a massive combine winner. He certainly had some athleticism questions heading into the combine, and he really just killed it across the board. Came in at 6 feet tall, 212 pounds, ran a 4.43 40, which will certainly play. He was tied for the second highest vertical jump, was also tied for the second highest broad jump. He's coming off back-to-back 1,200 plus yard rushing seasons. He is really capable as a pass catcher, not someone who's just, racking up volume, catching a ton of checkdowns. He can run a fairly advanced route tree. Now, he does need to clean up the drops. I believe he had 5 of them in 2024. And then he also needs to improve in pass protection. But I'm someone who likes having that receiving upside. It's kind of a nice baseline you have that gives you that extra ceiling when it comes to fantasy. And I think with his combine performance, could potentially move into day 2. At the very worst, he's probably going in the round 4 area with how well he tested at the combine. And then my last guy here in tier 4, another just massive winner from the combine, Bashal Tutin. And I think he also could have potentially jumped into day 2 here. This dude's just a physical freak. Not a huge running back, 5'9", 206, but he ran a 4.3 240, had the number 1 vertical jump, and then was tied for the second highest broad jump. For someone who's not that big, he's great after contact, 4.4 yards after contact per attempt in 2024. 54% of his rushing yards were on 15-plus yard plays, and then he also can catch passes, 23-plus receptions in 3 straight seasons. So he checks a lot of boxes. I think the athletic testing could definitely kind of boost him into that day 2 range. And there is a pretty significant difference between, running backs getting drafted round 2, round 3, compared to the guys that fall into day 3, even round 4. There's a decent difference here. So Bashal Tutin, definitely a big winner. And then my 5th and final tier here, we're going to start off with RJ Harvey. And the dude is just a big play machine. coming out of UCF, had 50+% of his rushing yards on 15+ yard plays in back-to-back seasons. That's not something you see with every single running back. He's productive as a pass catcher, at least 19 receptions and 215 receiving yards in each of his last 3 seasons. Now, he's not someone who's going to have like that workhorse upside. You could see the argument for some of the guys ahead of him, a Scatabo, DJ Giddens, maybe Tootin doesn't have the size, but Harvey's a little bit on the smaller end, 5'8", 205, certainly compact, but not someone who I'm expecting to translate and get like 70+% opportunity share. But when we're looking at these guys who could be potential committee backs, I think he has a unique skill set for it. Someone who could slot in, get 10 to 15 touches a game, get that receiving usage, have the big play upside. Kind of like what we were looking at with a guy like Devon Achane, where you're like, all right, he's on the smaller end. He's not going to be a workhorse, but with the right fit, he found that fit with Miami. You rip off big plays, you have the touchdown upside, you catch passes, you can certainly pan out for fantasy. And I'm typically going to side with those guys who can catch passes in those potential committees. And even though I do say that, at number 10 to wrap up my top 10, I have Damian Martinez, and I actually feel like he would be a really solid like complementary back to a guy like RJ Harvey, where Harvey's getting more like that third down work. And then Damian Martinez comes in and I think projects as a really solid early down guy who also could certainly, fill into the goal line role, the short yardage situations. He's 6 feet tall, 217 pounds, ran a 4.5 140, which at that size will certainly play. He's a physical runner, great between the tackles. Nothing really crazy as a pass catcher, kind of just someone who's racking up a lot of checkdowns. And then he's not a big play threat, doesn't have like that breakaway speed, not consistently ripping off huge plays, but he's just a guy that I think is going to find a role at the NFL level, and that could be a spot where he's, racking up a lot of carries, maybe not super involved as a pass catcher, but you go to a good team that's going to be scoring a lot of points, he could certainly be someone who's racking up a lot of touchdowns in like that early down role. So that is going to wrap it up for my current top 10. I think the combine really helped a lot of these dudes out. Could see some dudes get pushed into day 2 that, maybe didn't have a great shot prior to the combine. Let me know your thoughts. Who do you think should be higher or lower? Would love to hear it. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.